Another crackdown on big tech, this time coming from the EU. The Commission going after Meta, Alphabet, and Apple. The statement saying that the EU has, quote, opened non-compliance investigations under the Digital Markets Act into Alphabet's rules on steering in Google Play and self-preferencing on Google Search, Apple's rules on steering in the App Store, and the choice first screen for Safari, and Meta's pay or consent model. So let's talk about what this means for the big tech giant, for Apple specifically. For that, I want to bring in Jim Kelleher. He is Argus Director of Research here to weigh in. Jim, it's good to see you. So I know you have a buy rating on Apple. You had that buy rating, reiterated that buy rating following the legal update that we got from the DOJ lawsuit against Apple last week. How are you looking at the fact that, what does this potentially mean to Apple's bottom line, the fact that now you also potentially have more pressure coming from the EU as well?
All right, so good morning, Sean and Madison. What I would generally say is, we've followed a lot of companies that have spent a lot of time in the courts over the years, such as Qualcomm, and these things do tend to drag on for a long time when the government feels that there are, unfair practices. What I would say is I expect over the long term, and I do expect this to take a while to play out, Apple will negotiate and grant some degree of openness to its ecosystem. At the same time, the immense core of Apple and iOS users is going to stay loyal to the company. That's what I'm thinking right now. The impacts on the bottom line are a little hard to quantify. Just looking at Apple's response to the DOJ complaint, they basically didn't say, we didn't do it, and nor did they say, we're not going to do it in the future. They stood on their principles of how they operate their ecosystem and said we're always interested in the security of our devices first and foremost. So I would look really at the Apple fundamentals, and I'd be willing to discuss those in a moment as being more indicative of the long-term stock drivers.
Well, I want to stay on the investigations for a second because I'm curious if this EU investigation to you felt like a bigger deal than what we saw here in the U.S.
On a preliminary basis, it looks as if they're also going after the fact that, the App Store seems too inclusive, that developers are, undercompensated, that there's an effective firewall preventing the apps from working as well or working outside, the App Store. So I think there will be negotiations all down the line as this thing unfolds, and Apple will give a little, and EU will give a little, and DOJ will give a little, and ultimately, the Apple, the velvet rope will be let down a little bit. The Apple ecosystem will be a little bit more open, but ultimately, I think Apple will do everything in its power, and I think it does have some power to preserve, most of its ecosystem.
Jim, I'm curious, at least with the antitrust case here in the DOJ, there has been some worry starting to trickle through that what Apple might be potentially forced to reveal in terms of their business offerings, because we know they're tight-lipped and we don't really get a good look to that. Do you think they're going to be able to maintain some of those confidential arrangements, or how do you see that potentially playing out?
Again, I think these are things that are a little more on the sidelines. Apple, I don't think there's enormous smoking guns in there. I don't think Apple is behaving unethically. I think they've been operating in the same way they've always been operating. So I'm not expecting big revelations of, that confidentiality is going to unmask some, horrendous goings on. What I'm focused on right now is the fact that Apple seems to be turning around its operations. If you look at 2023, the stock was up 48%, and yet at this time a year ago, in other words, at the fiscal half-year mark, Mac sales were down in double digits in revenue. iPhone sales were down about 5%. Overall revenue was down. Now, I know the street consensus for this year is for slightly down earnings, but if you look at the reality of the first half of this year, you'll see that Mac sales are up slightly, and you'll see that iPhone sales are up a few percentage points, and they're doing well in every region, excluding Greater China. That's as expected. So I think we're going to see a couple surprise quarters coming forward, and I think we'll do well from here. And the valuation-wise, the stock's trading in line with its 5-year historical multiple at a time when big tech names are trading at huge premiums to where they've traded in the past 5 years.
Right, but it's interesting to note that Apple's stock is down about 8% year to date still, though, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. We know we got to let you go. Really appreciate it. That was Jim Kelleher, Argus Director of Research, joining us on that Apple, Meta, and Alphabet news.